This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 31st through August 6th. On this week's show, MTV debuts and influences pop culture, Pearl Jam drops an iconic music video, and Hamilton takes its shot. On August 1st, 1981, an event happened that changed and defined music for the next 25 years or so. That was the day when MTV debuted. There had been attempts at music video channels before. There was a channel called the Now Explosion in Atlanta back in 1970. Some record stores had a music video promotional channel piped into their stores called Music Video TV. Shows like Soul Train, Top of the Pops, and American Bandstand occasionally used music videos during their shows. Plus, there was Don Kirshner's rock concert and also the Midnight Special and the Old Gray Whistle Test, which all used music videos and concert footage. Of course, the Beatles famously made music videos and small films in order to promote their music. However, it was a guy named Robert Pittman, who at that time was a media executive at Warner American Express Satellite Entertainment Company, say that 5 times fast. Thankfully, they changed the name to MTV Networks. He was the one who decided to give the idea of a video version of a radio station a national rollout, mainly because teenagers were being ignored by corporate media, and thus they were a completely untapped market with lots of disposable income. Sometimes it's about the vision and the passion. Most times it's about the money. Pittman tried the idea on WNBC television in New York City with a 15-minute show called Animal Tracks and based it on a show in New Zealand called Radio with Channels. His boss, John Lack, also had experience with the concept, having helped to run a show that was created by Michael Nesmith, formerly of the group The Monkees, called Pop Clips. They all decided to give this new idea a go, and at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on August 1st, 1981, MTV debuted. The long opening was of a space shuttle countdown, followed by the shuttle taking off and a photo of Neil Armstrong holding an MTV flag, followed by an animated MTV logo. A 30-second version of that opening, sometimes with a Saturn V rocket, ran at the top of every hour with the video jockeys, or VJs as they became known, telling you what was coming up during that next hour. Fun facts about the opening. The first words said on the network were said during the original opening. They were, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll," end quote. They were said by John Lack. The space shuttle part of the opening was discontinued in 1986 due to the January 28, 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. The MTV theme song that ran in the background was written by Jonathan Elias and John Peterson. The first video played on the channel was, of course, the famous prophetic "Video Killed the Radio Star" by the Buggles, which had as one of its members future super producer Trevor Horn. The first female singer on the channel was also the second video played overall on the channel. That honor belonged to Pat Benatar with the song "You Better Run." The first male solo artist was Rod Stewart with the third video, "She Won't Dance With Me." The rest of the top 10 videos played that day were Little Susie's "On the Top" by PhD, and who among us remembers that song? "We Don't Talk Anymore" by Cliff Richard, great song. "Brass in Pocket" by The Pretenders, another great song. "Time Heals" by Todd Rundgren, one of my favorite Todd Rundgren songs, I might add. REO Speedwagon's "Take It on the Run," not bad. And Styx's "Rockin' the Paradise," another good song. The first VJ shown on the channel was Mark Goodman, who now does an 80s streaming station on Sirius XM satellite radio. There were 5 original MTV VJs. Along with Mark Goodman, there was J.J. Jackson, Nina Blackwood, Martha Quinn, and Alan Hunter. As the VJs have said in many interviews over the years, The first couple of years felt like they were trying to build a plane while they were flying it. They were mainly a bunch of interns and wannabe actors who were filming in a shabby little studio on West 33rd Street in New York City and who were trying out new things and new ideas. In fact, the only quote-unquote adult in the room was the late, great J.J. Jackson, who had a radio DJ background. They all had a, well, what we got to lose? Let's just go for it attitude. After they got going, the filming moved to a studio on West 57th Street in New York. There were a few other problems with the channel at first. The first one was distribution. Not many people had cable. In fact, my neighborhood didn't get cable in Springfield, Massachusetts until 1983. The second was that there were extremely few minority artists being played on the channel. More on that in a little while. The third was that there weren't that many artists making music videos, at least not many American pop and rock artists, unless they were doing concert videos. To be sure, music videos had been around for decades, along with the aforementioned Beatles. Bob Dylan, ABBA, and the Rolling Stones all made them. And of course, who can forget Queen's iconic music video for Bohemian Rhapsody, which has earned the distinction of being its own meme. R&B artists were making videos, but again, MTV wasn't playing any of those. Instead, MTV started playing British artists who had been making music videos for years due to the uber-popular British BBC TV music show and institution Top of the Pops. Since that was all that MTV wanted to play, they played it pretty much nonstop. Thing was, people liked what they heard and went to the record stores to buy the singles and albums within the first few months. And that in turn made record labels get radio stations to play the music, and that, my friends, is how new wave music became a thing in America. Music videos got so popular that even artists who made music video parodies got famous. See Weird Al Yankovic and his music videos Eat It and Fat, which of course parodied Michael Jackson's Beat It and Bad. What was the influence of MTV? Oh, this is going to be a long one. Well, for starters, videos did kill the radio star. See, before that, it didn't really matter what you looked like because people were listening to your music. After that, image became everything. A lot of bands became roadkill in the video era, with lots of other bands who never would have made it big becoming huge stars because of the way that they looked. Also, MTV became appointment television. World video premieres became a huge thing. People had to rush home to catch the latest video from their favorite artists. Remember, kids, this was long before the internet became a thing. Hell, long before it even became known. If you missed something on television, then you completely missed it unless you either had an expensive VCR and could run it nonstop, if you had cool parents at least, or you had to sit there and wait for the video so you could tape it and watch it again later if you didn't have such cool parents. MTV started the era of the movie soundtrack. Actually, the movie Flashdance started it when they started combining movie clips with their soundtrack music in order to promote both the movie and the music soundtrack. And once that took off, every movie had to have a killer soundtrack, or at least one or two good songs that would get played on the radio. MTV also pushed genres like new wave, hair bands, and as we'll see later, hip-hop and grunge rock, although they were pretty late to the hip-hop party, but at least they got there. They also were late to the R&B and dance craze in the late 1980s and early 90s because they didn't play those videos either. Again, we'll get to that later. MTV's influence also didn't end with record sales. It affected television in general. MTV spawned a host of copycats, most notably a show called Friday Night Videos on NBC, which used to run after The Tonight Show. There was their own spin-off channel, VH1, which helped to push adult contemporary country rock or rock country, depending on how you look at it, and also new age music back in the 90s. Remember Yanni and Kenny G and all that? Oh, Good times. Good music decade. There was Canada's version of MTV called Much Music, along with a copycat American channel called Fuse. MTV also caused the head of NBC television at the time, Brandon Tartikoff, to famously write on a napkin at a restaurant during a pitch session with a producer that for his next show, he wanted, quote, MTV Cops, end quote. That idea for the show became the trend-setting 80s cop show Miami Vice. We'll discuss the show in September's episodes when we talk about it when the show premiered. One thing that MTV does not get enough credit for is that it inspired an entire generation of kids to get into videography and editing, and in the process turned music videos into an art form. They also got artists to step up their game, turning some videos into, in some cases, mini-movies. Case in point, Michael Jackson's Thriller video. MTV also had hit shows of their own. There was a game show called Remote Control, which had Ken Ober, Colin Quinn, and Kari Wurr, and also was one of Adam Sandler's first shows. There was a dance show called Club MTV with Downtown Julie Brown, Wubba Wubba Wubba, Good Night, God Bless. Fun fact, before Camille Grammer was on one of those Real Housewives shows as Kelsey Grammer's ex-wife, she danced on Club MTV. There was a dating game show called Singled Out, which was hosted by pre-Nerdist and G4 TV Attack of the Show host Chris Hardwick, who was also a VJ back then. That show also made stars out of his co-hosts Jenny McCarthy and Carmen Electra. There was MTV Unplugged, which started out as an idea after John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora did an acoustic version of their song Dead or Alive during an MTV Video Music Award ceremony because the producers needed to fill a few minutes of the ceremony. The response was so good that they turned that idea into a show. And that idea, well, it kind of started out slowly at first, but then Paul McCartney did the show and released it as a bootleg album. After that, everybody wanted to do the show. It rejuvenated Mariah Carey's career at that time and yielded numerous hit albums and even got Tony Bennett and Eric Clapton Album of the Year Grammys for their performances. There was also Headbangers Ball with host Ricky Rockman, which showed heavy metal videos. There was the late-night alternative rock show 120 Minutes with host Matt Pinfield, which introduced the mainstream to goth and alternative artists like The Cure and Depeche Mode. They also showed live concerts, which was how America saw the British half of Live Aid. There was also The Real World, which jump-started the latest wave of reality television, and who can forget Jersey Shore, 16 and Pregnant, Teen Mom, and The Hills. There was the original boasting show long before influencers, Instagram, and YouTube high-end real estate videos. The show simply named MTV Cribs. Remember, by the way, Master P and his gold fixtures, or Birdman and his mansion just for partying? There was MTV's groundbreaking news coverage called MTV News, which had, among others, journalists Kurt Loder, John Norris, Tabitha Soren, Serena Altschul, Allison Stewart, and Chris Connolly, among many others. Kurt Loder was the one who announced to the Gen X crowd that Kurt Cobain had passed away, as MTV broke into regular programming to announce it and to cover it for a good chunk of the night, actually. There was Total Request Live, its countdown show starring Carson Daly, who is now on NBC's Today Show lineup. MTV also got into politics by hosting nonpartisan Get Out the Vote programming and sponsoring presidential inauguration balls, and also doing an AIDS awareness campaign back in the day when AIDS was a huge thing and was not popular to talk about. I'm not sure what MTV shows now. I literally couldn't tell you. I haven't watched that channel in probably over a decade, maybe even two. The channel became irrelevant once they decided to shift as far away from music as humanly possible. In fact, the M in MTV doesn't even stand for music anymore. Literally, they changed it. To what? Couldn't tell you, but there's a lot of jokes on the internet. I get that YouTube, Vivo, and Spotify changed the dynamics and people weren't going to wait around to watch the latest videos. However, they could have at least stayed relevant with music documentaries, TV shows, movies, interview shows, anything really. Maybe their new owners will care enough to get MTV back to being something other than a channel where they do a couple award shows for things they don't even show, because right now they're just kind of there. However, back in the day, they were on the cutting edge of pop culture, and MTV's reign as kingmakers of music and pop culture all started at 12:01 a.m. on August 1st, 1981. As an added bonus, even though British music helped to propel MTV in the early 1980s, there was still no MTV in Europe. That changed on August 1st, 1987, when MTV Europe premiered. The channel is now called MTV Global. The first video played? Well, appropriately, it was Dire Straits with Money for Nothing, about a guy watching and commenting on music videos. The song also had Sting singing the MTV advertising slogan in the chorus, "I want my MTV." It's a great bunch of advertisements they did back in the day. The people who started MTV Europe, by the way, were Viacom, British Telecom, and the Robert Maxwell Group. If that name doesn't sound too familiar to you, well, Robert Maxwell was a World War II hero, literally, a British politician, and, a notorious British media and tabloid rag owner who mysteriously died in 1991 when he fell off of his yacht, which was named for his daughter, which we'll get to in a second. His body, by the way, was found floating in the Atlantic. After his death, it was discovered that he had embezzled millions of dollars from his company's pension funds. Oh, and one of his daughters that the yacht was actually named after, it was Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah, that Ghislaine Maxwell of Jeffrey Epstein, Prince Andrew et al. Fame. Release the files. My only political comment. Anywho, back in the early 1980s, MTV had a bit of a racial problem. In the beginning, they were desperate to put on any music videos, which is why New Wave happened in America, because most artists who were making music videos at the time were British. However, because they considered themselves a rock format channel, they rarely played any R&B or dance videos. That also meant that for the most part, they didn't play any videos with minorities in them. It's not to say that there weren't videos or artists available to them, like Tina Turner, even before What's Love Got to Do with It. The Specials were the 74th video played on the channel, but they were a racially mixed band. Plus, they played ska music, which was well within MTV's wheelhouse. There were 209 videos played during the first day, and the only black people shown were the three black guys in the Specials and video jockey J.J. Jackson. Basically, in the early days, say the first few years, if you were black and your name was not Jimi Hendrix, you probably weren't getting played on MTV. I mean, if MTV considered themselves a rock music video channel, then they should have just called themselves RMTV. Would have made more sense. The rock format excuse was just MTV's excuse at the time, even though they were still very desperate to play any music videos. For example, on that first day, Phil Collins' iconic In the Air Tonight was played 5 times, along with April Wine and The Who, while Iron Maiden were played 4 times, along with The Pretenders, Tom Petty, Stevie Nicks, and Rockpile with Robert Plant. Even Mark Goodman gave that rock music channel excuse to David Bowie during an interview that famously reappeared online and started making the rounds when David Bowie passed away. I'll put up a link to that exchange between the two of them in the show notes if you want to check it out. David was not buying Mark Goodman's excuse about the channel needing to appeal to middle America, which is why that they weren't playing black artists. He wasn't buying that one single bit. This all changed in 1983 when CBS Records president Walter Yetnikoff made MTV an offer. Actually, he made a threat. See, he had this artist named Michael Jackson who had been trying to get his videos played on the channel. As a matter of fact, Michael had been making music videos for years, both as a solo artist and with his brothers, the Jacksons. If he didn't get his music videos played, Yetnikoff would pull every single video from every artist that CBS had on the channel. Back then, CBS Records was one of the biggest record labels out there, and they had a lot of artists on MTV. MTV relented, and they started playing Billie Jean, but only after it had hit number 1 on the Billboard singles chart. Then, suddenly, it became a thing to play. And then Michael Jackson released the song Beat It with the now classic music video to go along with it. Both he and MTV got a lot of exposure. In fact, it's often said that Michael Jackson made MTV and MTV made Michael Jackson. I would say that statement is accurate. It was a pretty symbiotic relationship. One could not have really fully succeeded without the other. Still, even though they were starting to put on black artists, for the most part, they stayed away from one genre of music that was trying to get huge at the time, hip-hop, or rap music as it was called back in the 80s. They started to play some rap videos from artists like the Beastie Boys and Run DMC, but for the most part, rap was shown on extremely light rotation. This began to change in 1987. Filmmaker Jonathan Demme's nephew, the late director Ted Demme, was a fledgling production assistant for MTV that year. He and his partner Peter Doherty approached MTV with an idea. How about a rap show with interviews and music videos? MTV said sure, but don't put it on MTV in America, where rap was getting more popular. Put it on in MTV Europe, because I have no idea. I figure it was probably their version of doing the old Foghorn Leghorn. Go away, kid, you bother me. Now, go play with your little TV show over there, because we only gave it to you because your uncle is some kind of a big deal in America. That type of routine. Funny thing was, that little show of theirs got really popular in Europe. And after it found success overseas, MTV had no choice but to bring it stateside. And Demme and Doherty were given the green light to finally do it in America. The original American episode aired on August 6, 1988. The original host was rapper Fab Five Freddy, who was already a well-known name to hip-hop, along with, of course, Blondie fans when he was name-checked in the rap on Blondie's song Rapture. Afterwards, MTV developed a daily and weekend edition of the show. Fab Five Freddy hosted the weekend edition, and for the weekday edition, Demme turned to Dr. Dre, not the Dr. Dre of NWA fame or Snoop Dogg fame, and Ed Lover, who was a friend of Demme's from high school. The show became a big hit. It ran for 7 years and spawned copycats like Rap City and Sucker Free. Most importantly, it helped to push hip-hop even more into the mainstream due to the fact that by then, MTV had established itself into more homes and more countries. And it all started when the show, Yo MTV Raps, was broadcasted on MTV in America on August 6, 1988. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. Since we're on the subject of MTV, let's discuss an iconic music video that premiered this week in music history. On the morning of January 8, 1991, 15-year-old high school sophomore Jeremy Wade Dell walked into his second period English class at Richardson High School, which is in the Richardson Independent School District in Richardson, Texas. Jeremy was known for being a bit of a loner. His classmates said that he was quiet, always kept to himself, always kind of sad. On that particular morning, Jeremy was late for school. When he walked into class, he was told to go to the headmaster's office, known in most schools as the principal's office, to fill out paperwork for being late, the good old-fashioned tardy slip. He left and then came back a few minutes later. He walked to the front of the class of 30 students and said to the teacher, quote, "Miss, I got what I really went for," end quote. What happened next would shock the class in Richardson, Texas, and we can't really say what happened because, streaming regulations and such. The incident drew local attention, but not a lot of national attention, except for a small article in a newspaper. One person read that article and decided to draw attention to Jeremy's pain and reasoning for his actions. As this person said in an interview in 1993, quote, "It came from a small paragraph in a paper, which means you do something and you make a big old sacrifice and try to get your revenge. That all you're gonna end up with is a paragraph in a newspaper. 64 degrees and cloudy in a suburban neighborhood." That's the beginning of the video, and that's the same thing in the end. It does nothing. Nothing changes. The world goes on and you're gone. The best revenge is to live on and prove yourself. Be stronger than those people. End quote. 16 years after that interview, that same exact person said that he felt, quote, "the need to take that small article and make something of it, to give that action, to give it reaction, to give it more importance," end quote. That person was Eddie Vedder, and he would not only give Jeremy that importance, but through a song, and especially a music video, Jeremy would help Eddie's band Pearl Jam become huge. Pearl Jam rose from the ashes of a few different bands. Guitarist Stone Gossard and bassist Jeff Ament were in a small Seattle band called Green River. Once Stone and Jeff left Green River, they started the group Mother Love Bone with lead singer Andrew Wood, who used to be in the band Malfunction. Mother Love Bone got a record deal, recorded the album Apple, and were on their way when Andrew passed away unexpectedly, leaving Mother Love Bone at a crossroads. After a few months of grieving his good friend Andrew, Stone started playing with guitarist Mike McCready after his band Shadow had broken up. Bad year for band breakups, apparently. They then got Jeff to join their new band. The first drummer that they tried to get was Jack Irons, who at one time had played with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They gave Jack a demo tape to gauge his interest. Jack said no to the offer. However, he knew a singer who might be interested in joining. Jack gave the tape to this guy, Eddie Vedder, who was in the band Bad Radio. Eddie listened to the tape, penned some lyrics to the songs, and sent the tape back. The guys were pretty impressed and got Eddie to come up to Seattle, Washington from San Diego, where he was at, to do an audition. Eddie was hired the next week. They then found their original drummer, Dave Grusin, named themselves after basketball player Mookie Blaylock, and started playing gigs until they got a record deal with Epic Records in 1991. And at that point, they renamed themselves Pearl Jam. The group stepped into London Bridge Studios with producer Rick Parisher in early 1991 to record their debut album 10, which was Mookie Blaylock's jersey number. In the span of 5 months, they went through 3 drummers. Dave Grusin left and checked himself into rehab. His replacement, Matt Chamberlain, lasted a couple of months. He's the drummer that you see in the music video for the song Alive, since the video was footage from a concert that the group held on August 3rd, 1991 at the Seattle venue Rock Candy. Matt left a couple months later to join the Saturday Night Live band and was replaced by Dave Ambrusi. It was in this environment that the song Jeremy was born. Side note, it's actually kind of funny how many drummers Pearl Jam has gone through during its run. It's almost like at Spinal Tap levels, we'll say. Anyway, Jeremy was actually about two different kids. Jeremy, who we already talked about, and a kid named Brian, who did something terrible in San Diego, California. Brian is who he's talking about in the second part of the song, where he starts with, "Clearly I remember picking on the boy." As Eddie said in an interview in 1991, quote, "I actually knew somebody in junior high school in San Diego, California that did the same thing just about. I remember being in the halls and hearing it, and I actually had altercations with this kid in the past. I was kind of a rebellious fifth grader, and I think we got into fights and stuff. So it's a bit about this kid named Jeremy, and it's also a bit about a kid named Brian that I knew and I don't know. The song, I think it says a lot. I think it goes somewhere. And a lot of people interpret it in different ways, and it's just been recently that I've been talking about the true meaning behind it, and I hope no one's offended, and believe me, I think of Jeremy when I sing it." End quote. Eddie was the sole lyricist on the song, while Jeff Ament did the music. Jeff said in an interview, quote, "I already had two pieces of music that I wrote on acoustic guitar, with the idea that I would play them on a Hamer 12-string bass I had just ordered. When the bass arrived, one of the pieces became Jeremy. I had an idea for the outro when we were recording it the second time. I overdubbed the 12-string bass and we added a cello. That was big-time production for us. Rick Parisher's a super talented engineer-musician. Stone Gossard, Pearl Jam's rhythm guitarist, was sick one day, and Ed, Rick, and I conjured up the art piece that opens and closes the song. That was so fun. I wanted to make a whole record like that. We knew it was a good song, but it was tough getting it to feel right, for the chorus to sit back and the outro to push it over the top. The tune went from practically not making it on the record to being one of the best takes. I'm not sure if it's the best song on the album, but I think it's the best take. On Jeremy, I always heard this other melody in the choruses and the end, and it never sounded good on guitar or bass. So we brought in a cello player, which inspired a background vocal, and those things made the songs really happen. Most of the time, if something doesn't work right away, I just say, F it. But this was an instance where perseverance paid off. End quote. When the album 10 was released in 1991, the album was not a huge hit right out of the gate. Their debut single, Alive, got noticed on MTV and did okay. Same with their second single, Even Flow. In 1992, they did an American tour. I actually went to see the band on April 7, 1992 at the Student Union Ballroom at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts, as I was running the local Musicland record store, which was in Hadley, Massachusetts, the town directly next door to Amherst, and had gotten free tickets. Tickets for the concert, by the way, were $8 for students and $10 for the general public. By the end of the summer of 1992, let's just say Pearl Jam were done playing $10 gigs at colleges, mainly because of the music video to this song. There were two music videos made for the song Jeremy. The first one was made by photographer Chris Cafaro, who Eddie had met and insisted to the record label that he make a music video for the band. The label said in 1991 that he could make one for any song that he wanted to. Chris chose Jeremy. The problem was that originally, Jeremy was never supposed to be released as a single. Chris still wanted to make it, so the band said yes, provided that they weren't going to pay for making it. Chris took money out of his own pocket, got a loan, sold a bunch of his furniture, found an actor named Eric Schubert, and made the music video in a warehouse on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. He had a spinning platform that the crew spun where he had each band member stand on it one at a time for filming purposes. Eddie made a funeral mourning band out of black gaffer's tape for his scene. The shoot was done, the label saw the video, said thanks, then didn't release it. It must be out there somewhere, and I hope someone reimbursed Chris for all his troubles. Hopefully. I mean, things cost money. 1992 came around. The album was doing okay, but it wasn't really knocking it out of the park at that point. The label had released the 2 songs, Even Flow and Alive, and needed to release another one, and suddenly Jeremy was looking like it might be a good single to release. They still needed a music video for it because they hated the first one, so they started from scratch. They got music video director Mark Pellington, who wasn't a Pearl Jam fan, but connected with Eddie through his passion for the song. In June of 1992, the band went to a studio in King's Cross, London, England, to shoot the band shots. For you Gen Z and millennials out there, yes, that is the area where Harry Potter left for Hogwarts in the first book, track 9 3/4. That track wall, by the way, is now a tourist attraction with a Harry Potter store directly right next to it because, of course it is. Capitalism. What are you going to do? Anyway, Pellington decided that unlike the original video version, he wanted to focus on Eddie as the narrator of the song, which is why you mainly see him in the video with the other guys interspersed throughout. Pellington also used a lot of quick edits in the video in order to make it feel like it was a collage. The band at first didn't like the concept of the video because they wanted to do another concert video like they did for Alive and Even Flow. In retrospect, according to Jeff Ament, the rest of the band should have just been left out of the video because it would have worked a lot better with only Eddie as the focus. The classroom scenes were shot at Bayonne High School in Bayonne, New Jersey. Jeremy was played this time by 12-year-old Trevor Wilson in his one and only acting role. In case you are about to do a Google search to find out whatever happened to Trevor Wilson, I'll save you the trouble because it is not a good ending. Trevor Wilson drowned while on vacation in Puerto Rico while swimming in 2016 at the age of 36. The music video for Jeremy premiered on MTV on August 1st, 1992. It very quickly struck a chord with everyone and was put into heavy rotation, which is MTV speak for it was played almost every other hour, sometimes every hour. When the single was released a couple weeks later on August 17, 1992, the song quickly rose on the American rock music charts, making it up to number 5. On the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart, though, it only made it up to number 79. The song, and especially the music video, quickly turned Pearl Jam into rock stars, with Nirvana striking first with Smells Like Teen Spirit and, of course, their album Nevermind. Both Nirvana and Pearl Jam ushered in the Seattle sound, more commonly referred to as the grunge rock era, and helped to crush the hair band era of rock music. Other Seattle groups started breaking through, most notably Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, although Soundgarden was actually the first of those 4 to release an album, but they didn't get popular until after the other guys did. Soon, record labels descended upon Seattle trying to find the next hot grunge band. The old joke was that in Seattle, you could get a band together on Monday and have a record deal by Friday. Coincidentally, a movie was filming in Seattle just before the Seattle sound got huge and was about the Seattle music scene itself. That movie was the Cameron Crowe movie Singles, which also had a completely unknown Pearl Jam at the time in a few scenes as actor Matt Dillon's backup band. Singles also helped to push grunge into the mainstream as the movie became relatively popular, and it also had an amazing soundtrack. Then there was the commercialization of grunge music and fashion, with fashion designers like Tommy Hilfiger selling $200 lumberjack shirts that normally went for less than $20 in your local department store, but we'll save those stories for another day. The music video itself was not without controversy. The original edit of the video had the actual act playing itself out. That got edited out, but the red marks on the kids remained. There was also an edit made to the classroom Pledge of Allegiance scene, as some people thought that the salute that was given in the scene might look like a Nazi salute, sort of an Elon Musk type of thing. There was also the usual, quote, let's blame music videos and music for the world's problems, end quote, routine going on. Case in point, there was a situation at Frontier Lake Junior High School in Moses Lake, Washington, after which, of course, local politicians and law enforcement tried to blame it all on the Jeremy music video. The music video went on to win 4 MTV Music Video Awards, including Video of the Year. When the band accepted the Video of the Year award on stage, they brought Trevor Wilson up with them. Eddie then went on to say, quote, no, I guess you gotta say thanks. No, the real shit is, if it weren't for music, I think I would have done the same thing in the classroom, you know? It really is what kept me alive, so this is kind of full circle. So, to the power of music, thanks. End quote. Then he handed the award to Trevor as they walked off stage. I have known people in my life who decided that the pain was too great. You yourself may be someone or know someone who feels the same way. So if you are or you know someone, there is help. We put the links to that help every week in the show notes, and this week is no different. And because we are talking about this music video and about this song, you might, in this day and age, need the help, especially with what's going on this time around. Sad to say. Jeremy spoke in class today. The now iconic music video for Pearl Jam's hit song, Jeremy, premiered on MTV on August 1st, 1992. I was going to do a few birthday greetings this week, but for the second week in a row, there are some other important events to cover. However, there are still some huge birthdays to shout out, so big happy birthdays go out to one of the greatest singers of all time, Mr. Tony Bennett, his being a heavenly birthday now. DJ and producer Fatboy Slim, a.k.a. Norman Cook of the band The House Martins. The late, great Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, the composer of the American National Anthem, Mr. Francis Scott Key, the iconic entertainer, Mr. Louis Armstrong, whose life we covered a few podcasts ago, Adam Yauch of the Beastie Boys, whose life we also covered a while back, and Jerry Halliwell, a.k.a. Ginger Spice of the Spice Girls, whose life is not exactly going that great at this particular moment since her husband, Christian Horner, got bounced from Red Bull Racing in Formula One. Anyway, the band Rush is, along with Yes, one of the most influential progressive rock groups of all time. Started in 1968 in Willowdale, Toronto, Ontario. The original lineup was guitarist Alex Lifeson, singer and bassist Jeff Jones, and drummer John Rutsey. After only a couple of weeks, Jones was replaced by Alex's classmate Geddy Lee. And even though they added and subtracted a couple more people, this was the lineup that they went with by 1971. As for the band's name, well, that came courtesy of John Rutsey's brother. The group played in Toronto, gained a following, and in 1973 they released a single which went absolutely nowhere and didn't lead to a record deal. At that point, Rush decided to do what at that time was considered still a pretty novel way of doing business. They said screw the record labels, and they created their own record label called Moon Records. In 1974, they released their debut album, simply called Rush, and released their first single off of it, Working Man. At first, the song seemed destined to go nowhere. But then, a radio station in working-class city Cleveland, Ohio, started playing it because of its lyrics about pride for the working man. The song took off after that. Right after the success of Working Man, John Rutsey developed health problems concerning diabetes. Plus, he was never really a fan of touring to begin with, so he left the group. Geddy and Alex decided to go the audition route to find their new drummer, and they found one of the greatest drummers of all time, said by both critics and other drummers alike, the legendary Mr. Neil Peart. The partnership would last a lifetime. Neil did the majority of the lyrics, while Geddy and Alex took care of the musical part. At first, they started out as a rock band. In 1977, they went into progressive rock with albums like A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, Moving Pictures, Permanent Waves, Signals, Grace Under Pressure, Power Windows, and Hold Your Fire. They had hit singles like Closer to the Heart, Tom Sawyer, Big Money, Limelight, Show Don't Tell, Stick It Out, Time Stands Still, and many, many more. The group lasted until August 1st, 2015. On that day, they played their last show at the Los Angeles Forum in Inglewood, California. The only people who knew that this was going to be the final show was the band. They did 2 sets and played 26 songs in total. They started with a taped intro of The World Is, The World Is, then went into The Anarchist. 26 songs later, they finished with Working Man with an intro of Garden Road, then did a taped outro, Exit Stage Left. When they were done playing, Neil Peart did something that he never did in any other concert. He came out from behind his drum kit and took in the applause with the rest of the band. He normally walked off stage. Unbeknownst to everyone else, Neil had started his fight with brain cancer and wanted to spend what time he had left with his family. He actually had to be convinced by the other guys to do this final tour. The band unofficially broke up in 2018, and on January 7, 2020, Neil Peart passed away from brain cancer at the age of 67. Rush's final concert with the lineup of Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and their legendary iconic drummer Neil Peart at the Los Angeles Forum in Inglewood, California on August 1st, 2015. This next story weaves in a little hip-hop, but not quite in the way you might think. Back around 2011 or so, Lin-Manuel Miranda was coming off of a very successful production that he created called In the Heights. The show had gone on to be nominated for 13 Tony Awards, winning 4 of them. Of course, when faced with such a greatly successful Broadway show, you kind of left wondering, what do you possibly do to top all that? When Lin-Manuel was going on vacation, he picked up a biography in the airport that was written by Ron Chernow called Alexander Hamilton. For some reason known only to creatives like us whose brains work like this, after reading a few chapters, he started picturing Hamilton's life as a musical, and he would give the play and the music a hip-hop soundtrack because, seriously, who wouldn't? I mean, really. Right around that time, then-President Barack Obama was doing an evening of poetry at the White House. He invited Lin-Manuel to perform parts of In the Heights. Lin-Manuel decided instead to road test parts of his Hamilton project because who would not want to try something brand spanking new in front of the President of the United States in a national audience, because you have absolutely no pressure at all there. Yikes. Turns out his gamble paid off. The response was overwhelmingly positive, so much so that he decided to continue with the project and flesh it out some more. In 2013, he did a workshop where he had most of Hamilton worked out by then. That went pretty well, so he finished the musical and started an off-Broadway run. He then moved the production to Broadway, where it ran in previews for what seemed like forever. drawing huge word of mouth, and on August 6th, 2015, after taking in almost $30 million in ticket sales during the preview alone, Hamilton officially opened on Broadway. To say that the response was positive would be the understatement of the century. Hamilton broke box office records and has sold out so many performances that even with Lin-Manuel no longer doing it, I still don't think that you can get a ticket to the show. It also tied the Matthew Broderick Nathan Lane production of Mel Brooks's The Producers for the record for most Tony Award wins with 11. As far as its effect on pop culture and history goes, Hamilton did a lot. First off, it introduced a couple of generations to a lesser-known member of our founding fathers. It also made him so popular that when it came time to redesign the $10 bill, he was left on it. It also helped to expand hip-hop to the Broadway audience. And Hamilton the Musical and the Phenomenon officially premiered on Broadway on August 6th, 2015. There is one item that I meant to put on last week's podcast, but forgot to talk about it until long after the episode was recorded and in the books. Since we mentioned this particular thing earlier in this podcast concerning MTV, I'm going to mention it now for a couple of minutes. At some point soon, though, we're going to do a deep dive into this show because it is really important to music history, especially in Great Britain. On January 1st, 1964, the British answer to America's American Bandstand, Top of the Pops, premiered on BBC television. The brainchild of Johnny Stewart and Stanley Dorfman, the weekly version ran for 42 years until its final weekly episode on July 30th, 2006. Then it became an annual show. Usually around Christmas, they do one a year. The show was a top 10 singles countdown show with performances and a studio audience. If an artist couldn't perform, then they played the artist's music video. You wanted to perform, though, because if you did, then it meant that you had made the top 10 on the British singles chart and meant that you were popular. Every artist wanted to get on the Top of the Pops. It was a status symbol that meant success. It also helped to make new wave and alternative music popular in Great Britain long before MTV made them popular in the States. And when you see TV studio clips of British artists like The Cure and The Smiths on YouTube, they were probably taken from a Top of the Pops episode that they were on. There were 2,272 episodes. Dusty Springfield's song, I Only Want to Be With You, was the first song that was featured on the show. The first band to play on it were the Rolling Stones, who did I Want to Be Your Man. When the weekly version ended, Snow Patrol had the honor of being the last band to perform. They did Chasing Cars. Status Quo had the most appearances during the 42-year run, with 87 of them. Jimmy Savile was the host with the longest tenure, with 20 years, from 1964 to 1984. There were a lot of hosts over the 42 years. The specials and the best of shows have been hosted by Clara Amfo since 2017. Back to Jimmy Savile for a minute, because his name requires mentioning something. If Jimmy Savile's name sounds vaguely familiar, it's probably because after his death in 2011, a number of police investigations revealed that he was a Jeffrey Epstein-style type creep to such a horrendous degree that his victims actually run in the hundreds. The last estimate was actually 589 victims over an almost 50-year time span. His crimes were also enabled by a number of people, and people with knowledge were told to shut up. If you don't want to Google Jimmy and you actually have Netflix, then check out Jimmy Savile, A British Horror Story. There were also some music artists whose episodes are no longer available to watch due to their own offenses, such as singer-songwriters Rolf Harris and Jonathan King, along with presenter Dave Lee Travis and rocker Gary Glitter, who had a big hit called Rock and Roll Part 2 that used to get played in sports stadiums until people finally canceled him for his transgressions. The end of the iconic weekly edition of the British television music show Top of the Pops, July 30th, 2006. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 31st to August 6th, with the exception of the July 30th edition right there. Thank you very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.